Hey, Patrick, I see you found the link.
Yeah, good job.
Perfection. Well, we'll see how small our crew is, Patrick. This class only has 14 students enrolled, and as you know from my syllabus, Zoom is optional, but I've got a pretty good core group and their paper is due in a week. So, hey, here they come.
There'll be some motivation maybe to.
Well, yeah, we'll see. Whenever there's points involved, then the stakes really get ratcheted up. Hey, Susanna.
Hey, Professor.
Good to see you.
Me too. I'm currently doing a busy thing, but I'll be back with you in 5 minutes. Is that fine?
Yeah, do your thing. You know how we do it.
Thank you. Yeah, I had to install my cameras. A couple days ago, I got like one of my, the lights, outdoor lights were stolen, and I was so pissed. I ordered the camera. I know, and one of my cameras did not record it. Who did that? I'm assuming it's one of the neighbor's kids, because we have a very naughty neighbor kids. I was trying to install the cameras, and I'm almost done with my second one.
I love it. Well, this is, we've talked about in our Zoom land, this is a new first, Susan. I've never had a student in class who is installing a security camera while they're in class. That's exciting. That's a new one for me.
Oh gosh, I do a lot.
Hi, Sanad.
I had actually a question regarding your poem.
Sure, yeah.
I think last line of the first stanza, it was stanzas, right?
Yep, let me go back.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but I think it was the last line. I think one of the students said that it was 6 syllables. Sorry.
This one, the last line of stanza 1, toward
yes.
God has in store.
No.
No,
I think I was one of them. I counted 7. I don't exactly remember, but okay, that's fine. I'll just go back and then read it.
It's all good. And I know you watched the Zoom. I know you weren't here last week, but one thing I said really quickly, but it is different. And I talked about this in the context of native speaker, non-native speaker. Some words, and I'm super Californian, Susanna, and we speak very quickly, like this word, for example, let me make sure I can zoom in so everyone can see here.
Yeah.
This word, and hi to Linda and Oscar coming in. Good to see you guys. Toward.
Professor, now, how are you?
Hi, Linda.
I just heard there was like 7 syllables. I don't know.
Well, Oscar, hey, Oscar. This is a word, toward. I would say it as 1 syllable, but if a student analyzed it as 2 words, like if you wanted to squeeze 2 syllables out of that word, I think that would be totally reasonable. And again, this is why I love to teach poetry, but it sometimes can feel difficult for non-native speakers because the rhythm, the number of syllables, where the stress comes in each word can feel different for non-native speakers. So just something to be on the lookout, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what I was doing. Like when I go back, when I go next to my desk, I'll just definitely let you know, like during the class.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify because, I did my 2 poems. So I'm excited to work on that.
Did you already finished your project?
I just did the poems. I am done with that. I was trying to figure out the rhymes. I mean, it's rhyming.
Okay.
And it sounds cool. I mean, it's not perfect because, yeah, I mean, it's not my first language. It's probably not going to be the best, but, I just challenged myself. I wanted to try.
You have a drill in your hand. Good. I'm glad you challenged yourself. I saw that Sanad said hi in the chat. That's fantastic. You guys might notice that we have Professor Hogan here with us. I think, Susanna, you might have been in a class last semester where I was being observed by other faculty, right? He's the only other person with his video on. Oh, you're on your phone today. Professor Hogan is here. He's here to watch me and see how I teach the class, not here to watch you or judge you guys, okay? So he is here to observe me. And like I said, I think Linda and Susanna, you might have been in other classes last semester where the same thing happened. And we'll start in about 1 or 2 more minutes here. Andre came in. Hi, Andre. Good to see you. Hey, Andre. How are you?
So how are you?
I'm doing really good. I really enjoyed reading your analysis of the poem. It was really, really wonderful. I didn't finish giving feedback for everybody's poetry practice assignment, but some of you I did, and I'm just saying to Andre, his was just wonderful, you guys. You might see an example of it next week. Hey, Aki. Aki came in too.
Hello,
Hi, Aki.
how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, but now today I can talk much. Because my daughter is sick today, and then she's lying down behind me. So
Oh, Aki, I'm so sorry. I had another student in the lab this morning. Their son was sick this week too, so I don't know if what's going on, but yeah, please, of course, take care of yourself and take care of your daughter. Aki, no problem at all.
thank you so much.
Of course. All right, this is our group pretty much. So we'll go ahead and get started. I'll show you what we're working with today. But it is Monday, October 4th. We're here in week 7 of the fall semester. It is great to see all of you guys. And I wanted to show you what we're going to get up to today. So I at the very beginning, I've got sort of Q&A because we got 1 more week right before the poetry project is due. So I want to make sure we have some time to answer any questions you still have. Then I wanted to sort of right at the beginning tell you what's coming up, right? We're kind of, today is going to be the last lecture that I have about poetry. We're really going to transition into fiction and our 2 books next week. So I want to make sure we're clear on where we are and where we're going. Then we're going to do our, like I said, final analysis, final lecture of poetry here. I've got a warm-up activity. I'm going to talk about examples for poetic analysis, and I'm going to sort of use that as my introduction, my transition to literary analysis in general. Again, I'm planting this seed in your brain right now. You know, the final big paper for this class is to do a full literary analysis paper. But I've tried to do this different ways in the past, sort of showing, okay, here's how to write that type of paper all at one time. It can be a lot. So this semester, I'm going to sort of break it up into different chunks. And today I'm going to talk about the introduction, or sort of what that first introduction paragraph or 2 of a literary analysis paper looks like. And I'm going to use that sort of to talk about the Emily Dickinson poem again, since it's something that we've all read and we're all familiar with. Okay. So first, though, on the list, that's coming up. Excuse me. Let me put my slides correct here. Poetry project. Remember, I'll show you in Canvas. Here it is. If we go to student view and go to assignments and the modules, are there any questions that people have about the poetry project at this time? Because I remember it is due 1 week from today, and it's 20% of your grade for this class. So I wanted to make sure we have time for questions. Anybody? And of course, type in the chat, unmute yourself, whatever you need, but anybody with questions about the project before we get going today? Andre, I see some screen movement.
No, with
Try one more time. I think your internet's a little slow today, Andre, but if you can hear me, did you have a question? Andre, for slow internet purposes, I'm going to mute you and come back in and let me know if you do have a question. Okay, I'm going to move on then. That's great. Again, something I'm putting in your mind right now. Remember, one part of this project is the responding, and one part is the analysis, okay? When I started to look at some of your assignments for the Emily Dickinson poem, I want to make sure we're clear about this. I think some people think they're doing analysis when what they're really doing is responding. So we'll get some more practice with this today. Okay, so that's great. No questions. But if they come up, you know what to do. Email me or text me and I'll get right to you. So what's coming up? So there's nothing new in Canvas this week. I did not publish any new lessons or quizzes or anything because I really want you to spend your time focusing on the poetry project. Now, in addition to that, I do want you to read The Pearl by John Steinbeck. We're starting this book for my people watching in the recording. This is the book that we are starting next week. I'm asking you to read chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. That's pages 1 through 40. I have a note here. There is also an older movie of this book on YouTube, so you can absolutely choose to watch the book. I just want to tell you right now, it will help you to understand the plot of the book, but remember, it is not going to help you when you write your literary analysis. So if you find the book, if you find a summary of the book, that is all good, but you really still need to read the words on the page, because when we do our paper, right, that's what we're going to be looking at and citing and analyzing. Okay, so poetry project due next week. Read The Pearl, start it. Even if you don't finish the first 40 pages, start it. Start the book as soon as you can. It's short and we read it fast, okay? So any questions at all about this stuff, about what's coming up? Susanna's getting ready to go pick up her kids. No, she's back, she's here, okay. Cool, so no questions about what's coming up. If it helps you guys, I can put an assignment into Canvas so that you see that this is due, right? These pages in the book are due, but there still won't be anything or any tasks or anything to complete there either, okay? Cool. Well, let's get started. So our warm-up today is, again, just more practice doing a sort of poetic analysis. And remember, I'm talking about analysis here. That means I want structure, I want rhyme, I want rhythm, I want assonance and consonants, and all those terms that we've practiced here. So I've got a really short poem, another Shel Silverstein poem, and I'll read the poem. And really what I want us to do in our warm-up today is, again, talk about what is giving this poem its rhythm. And the more we can talk about specific lines, specific sounds, you know, consonants, assonants, all those things that I've talked about, the better, because again, that's what you'll be doing in your essay. So this is woulda, coulda, shoulda. And before I start, I know this is a very high level class and you're all really comfortable with English here, but woulda, coulda, shoulda, these are all contractions, right? Of what? When we say woulda, coulda, shoulda, what am I really saying?
You mean rhyming?
No, I mean, woulda, coulda, shoulda, these are contractions, right? These are shortened forms of multiple words. So if I said
You mean syllables?
no, let's wait. First, I just want to make sure meaning is clear, Susanna. Great question. So if I say I could have done something, what am I really saying? I could have done this. I'm saying what? I could have done this.
Like a possibility to do
Good.
something.
Good, I love it. So Linda's jumping in, right? These are modals, right? Would have, could have, should have, right? So when he uses these words in the poem, so Susanna's sort of getting at something interesting here. How this connects to the number of syllables is really interesting, but I just want to make sure, again, for the meaning of the poem, when it's woulda, coulda, shoulda, it kind of means I could have done this thing. I should have done this thing. I would have done this thing if blah, 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 blah. Right, so Linda, you're absolutely correct that these are modals that we use to talk about ability or possibility or any of those things, right? So let's look at this together. If we need to practice the meaning more, we can do that too, but then we can look at the structure. So this is woulda, coulda, shoulda by Shel Silverstein. All the woulda, coulda, shouldas laying in the sun, talking about the things they woulda, coulda, shoulda done. But those woulda, coulda, shouldas all ran away and hid from one little did. So let's make sure meaning is clear here. Let's start with the response, right? What's going on? How do we feel? What do we think the poet is trying to say? Then Susanna, let's talk poem, a rhyme and rhythm and stuff here. What's the meaning of this poem for you guys when you read it, or even just the feeling?
It feels like, you know, he could have done something, but he didn't.
I love it. Already Susanna's saying there is this feeling of, Susanna's absolutely correct. There's this feeling of, I could have done it, but I didn't. I should have done it, but I didn't. I would have done it, but I didn't, right? Again, a pretty normal feeling, I think, for human beings. Good. Anybody else? Tahmina, did I see you unmute yourself? Or Linda, did I see anybody else have an idea? What's going on, the meaning here, the feeling of the poem? You can type in the chat if you'd like as well.
I think the last two lines in this poem, as you said, but those would, could, should all run away and hide from what little did. Then he later maybe he explained that he did after all of this hoping or willing to do things, and then it just runs.
I love it. Linda, again, I'm really pleased, right? See, now we're getting this connection between response and analysis. Linda is absolutely correct, right? Something happens in the last two lines of this poem, right? No doubt about it.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Linda talking about that poem, they ran away and hid from one little did. So we have this feeling of, in the first lines of the poem, in fact, in the first, how many lines? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. In the first 5 lines of the poem, it's all woulda, coulda, shoulda in line 1, woulda, coulda, shoulda in line 4, woulda, coulda, shoulda in line 5, and then we get this turn, right? And then things start to change, and instead we get all ran away and hid from one little did. So I'm I'm suggesting things to you now, but so what do we think the poet is saying here? What's more important? What's more valuable? Or what's more powerful? Yes, please, Oscar.
So I think that, in my opinion, you know, and I totally respect other my classmate opinions, that what the poem wants to say to us is that the woulda, coulda, and shoulda doesn't exist.
Ooh, go on. I like this. I'm interested. Tell me more.
Yeah, they don't exist, you know, because sometimes we do things and we say, if I would have done this, you know, but that doesn't exist, and it never existed.
I love it. Oscar's going to an even sort of deeper level we were talking about.
And the same with the coulda and the shoulda. And sometimes we blame ourselves for things that, you know, they were not even in our hands, you know, to control. And we start saying these words, you know, about these things.
I love it. Yeah. And can I ask you, Oscar, because you did something really nicely here. You used the pronoun they to talk about the woulda, coulda, shouldas, which is exactly what the poet does here. So I wanted to ask you, in line 2, what are they doing? The woulda, coulda, shouldas, what are they doing in line 2, Oscar?
They are like exposed.
I love that. But even just what's the verb that he uses in line 2?
Laying.
Right. So I love your point. They don't exist, but even if they do, they're just hanging out, right? They're laying around. They're doing nothing, right? I mean, they're kind of laying in the sun. Good. I love it. Does anyone want to add on? I could talk about what Oscar said, but anybody want to add? Because Oscar said some rich, interesting things there, I think. Anybody else about the meaning? Because again, next I want to this is a quick warm up, so we're going to move kind of quickly, but I want to talk about rhythm. But so in line 2, we get a verb, right? We've talked about sort of how poets use images and a lot of action words to create the feeling of the poem. In line 2, he says, laying in the sun. In line 3, talking about the things they woulda, coulda, shoulda done. In line 6, though, what happens? Again, so we get what the coulda, woulda, coulda, shouldas are doing. They're lying and they're talking. And then in line 6, what do?
Run.
Yes, they run and they
Hide.
exactamundo, Linda, exactly right. In line 6, they run away and they hide, right? And they run away and hide because, or what's that turn, like you said, Linda? In line 7, we get the real most powerful verb in the whole poem, right? And what's that verb?
Did.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, exactly, exactly. So I think for me, listening to Susana and Linda and Oscar, I feel like you guys are with me on the sort of feeling, the meaning of the poem, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about the rhythm, just for practice. I've got another slide for us here. Did I make a duplicate? I did. So let's just quickly, now Susanna again, always thinking very wisely and about the structure here. Let's look at the syllables. How many syllables in line 1? Susanna's showing 8. Do we agree with Susanna? Susanna says 8 fingers. All the, woulda, coulda, shouldas. Susanna, I agree. How about line 2? How about line 2? How many syllables? And remember, you can just type the number in the chat if you like.
Did I say it or no?
Please.
5.
Great. Do we agree? Anybody disagree with Susanna? I agree with Susanna, but if you disagree, I'd love to hear your reason why. Cool. How about line 3?
6.
Susanna, you just want to do it for us? And just so right, for the people who aren't here and watching on the recording too, I'll do the same thing like Susanna was doing, right? Lay in the sun, 5 syllables. Talking about the things, talking about the things. So Susanna, you had 6. You want to tell us, where did you get 6?
Yeah, I got confused.
No, and this is again like your excellent question at the beginning of class.
You know why?
Yeah, tell me.
I think I was concentrated on about.
Yep, and I was just going to talk about that one, right? Yeah. So we notice here, we haven't talked too much because again, we could go really deep into poetic structure, but these apostrophes here, it's not laying, right? He wants us to say layin', and it's not talking. He wants us to say talkin'. And this apostrophe at the beginning of the word about is sort of getting rid of the letter A, which makes it a one syllable word. Instead of about, it's talking about. So again, we could do, let me ask hopefully a very obvious question here. Again, thinking about the rhythm and the feeling of the poem, I began by saying woulda, coulda, shoulda. These are contractions. You know, so if we think about contractions and saying layin' and talking, what kind of feeling does this poem have? A really like formal Shakespeare feeling or kind of like an everyday speech feeling?
Everyday speech.
Thank you, Oscar. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. And in fact, for you guys at 350, if you've taken EW 340 or English 300, you know already, never, ever write woulda, you never write woulda, you never write coulda, you never write shoulda. But of course, in poetry, you get a little more freedom than in a research paper. So we've got a sort of different tone, a different feeling, a different style. So Susanna, you're absolutely correct. The word about usually has 6 syllables, but this apostrophe here is kind of a way of shortening it, or even, I don't want to call it a contraction, right? Because contractions are making 2 words into 1 word. Here he's sort of just chopping off one of the syllables here, right? Does that make sense? Because it's a great sort of question that something that Susanna was pointing out there. Does that make sense, guys, about sort of how the contractions are affecting the feeling of the poem as well?
Yes.
Cool. Let's look at the next line. They woulda, coulda, shoulda done. How many syllables?
8.
Yep. They woulda, coulda, shoulda done. How about the next line?
4.
We're on line. I'm sorry, Frank. And hi, it's good to see you, Frank.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing really well. It's great to see you. Line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Frank. If you want, you
Sorry.
just no, I knew you were on line 2 or 3. You want to take line number 5 there, Frank? How many syllables in line 5 but those?
9.
Let's see. But those woulda, coulda, shouldas. Yeah. Another 8 syllables there. And how about let's just finish out and then we'll talk about this. I think you'll start to see a little pattern here. How about line number 6? How many syllables? You want to do that one, Frank? All ran away and hid.
5.
All ran away and hid.
6.
You want to do the last one, Frank?
From one little thing. 4.
From, I heard you say 5. From one little.
No, I said 4.
No, but I heard you, when you spoke, I heard you count 5, but then you said 4. Little is 2 syllables. So from
Oh, okay.
one
Then-
little did. 4 words, 5 syllables.
Wow.
I hope something's very obvious to you guys right away. We have 3 lines with 8 syllables. In each of the lines with 8 syllables, what do we notice? What's unique about those 8 syllable lines? They share something in common.
Interesting.
Tell me, Oscar, what's interesting?
The words, they're the same words.
And what are those words, Oscar?
Woulda, coulda, and shoulda.
So exactly correct. And I love that you said, ooh, interesting, right? This is why we count syllables, because sometimes when we don't count syllables, we might not recognize, oh, wow. Every time the poet says woulda, coulda, shoulda, he's using the same number of syllables in those lines, right? Whenever he says those words. And even more interesting, right? We've talked about the title of the poem a little bit. That's the title of the poem, right? The author gave this poem the title of woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? And now I'm going to switch to rhythm here in a second, but do we just want, now we're just kind of guessing a little bit, but that's the point. What do we think this is saying to us? The longest lines in the poem are about woulda, coulda, shoulda. Can we make some connection between the structure, 8 syllables, and the feeling that the poem gives us? Do we want to make a guess here? I could tell you what I think. But
Kind of finalizing, like they could do it, they should do it, but they didn't.
and what are they doing instead? Are they being short and clear and direct, or are they hanging around?
Yeah, it's
Yes.
more deeply meaning, you know.
Yes,
Kind of
exactly.
finalizing the whole point of the poem.
I think so too. Right? I think, as I've said, a great poem or a good poet, that there is a connection between the deeper structure and the meaning of the poem, right? So I do think, like Susanna says, it's no mistake that the longest lines, and almost the feeling of like, oh, I'm just wasting time, I'm just taking my time, I'm laying in the sun, I'm talking. Those are the lines where we get woulda, coulda, shoulda. And the shorter lines are where things start to happen, right? So let's talk a little bit here about these final 2 lines, like Linda did. What do we notice in these final 2 lines? Hopefully something that's really obvious in line 6 and 7. Tell me.
It did.
Thank you, Susanna. Yeah, we get rhyme. We get really clear, rhyme right after each other. And where is the rhyme? In the middle of the line or at the end of the line?
At the end.
Yeah, so that's exactly correct, Linda. So absolutely, right? And like we've talked about, when we get hid and did at the end of the line, that gives us that real strong feeling of rhythm and meaning, right? That really gives us a feeling of rhythm and meaning. So what else could we say about these final two lines in structure? We've got rhyming. What do we think about the syllables? Does it matter? What do we think here? Oh, I see chats. I've been missing chats. I'm so sorry. Andre was typing in the chat. Tafina was typing in the chat. I just saw this. I was too excited about the poem, you guys. Thank you for typing in your answers when we were talking about the syllables. I appreciate you. I'm sorry I didn't see it until now. How about the last two? I'll read it one more time. And remember, I'm going to go back to Professor Noor's questions here, like we talked about for the response. I really want you to think about this one. How does the poem end? And why does it end this way, right? Because notice how it feels at the end of the poem. And I'll read it one more time in my California voice here. All right, so woulda, coulda, shoulda. All the woulda, coulda, shouldas laying in the sun, talking about the things they woulda, coulda, shoulda done. But all those woulda, coulda, shouldas all ran away and hid from one little did. Do you get any feeling at the end of the poem?
I think so. And he be okay now at the end.
I love this. And tell me why, Frank. Can you tell me, is it just about the rhyme?
Because he had so many worries until 1, 2, 3, 5 lines. Then he all down and hit. So I don't know, he figured how to do it. Number 5, then that gonna be help the whole thing. So he's not everything okay for him or for her. That I figured.
Good. I love it, Frank. Frank was talking about, please, Linda.
I just like have a small comment on this. Like I think like he was wishing or she, I don't know, wishing something to do or hoping to do something, and then it's she make it just true. Yeah, like or she's successful on something after this wishes, or it was woulda, coulda, or shoulda. Because I know it's like ability to do something, or you wish you do something. So I don't know. I feel like in the beginning struggling of something, and then everything was okay in the end of this poem.
Love it. Great. Fantastic. Good. Frank, even Frank and Linda, they were sort of describing different feelings, but they both said some kind of change, right? Some kind of shift, some kind of movement in the feelings of the poem. I agree. Anything else about, I can tell you what I think here, but anybody else want to talk about the last two lines? Susanna, you got anything? You don't have to. Good. I'll tell you. And again, for the folks watching, I'm recording. Partly, I can say this because of my, I've got native speaker rhythm. I know what it's like. But I think for me as a native speaker, this poem feels like it ends really quickly. Like it's almost like this poem interrupts itself, because we see here, right? 855, 8866. For whatever reason, you guys, I think my native speaker brain is sort of anticipating maybe another 8-syllable line. Susanna, you're clapping. You agree? Yeah, because I know Susanna's been around native speaker rhythm.
I was keep reading. I was like, it feels like open-ended. I don't feel the end. Like it has to go.
Well, it's really interesting because here's how I would say this. Now, again, I'm not expecting this type of analysis from you guys yet. You're not there, but I want you to see examples of it. I think this poem's a really short, fun example of playing with some of those sort of children's-like rhymes we're used to. And remember our video about rhythm, we do start to expect things. We do start to feel like, ooh, I think there's going to be another woulda, coulda, shoulda. He's going to say the words woulda, shoulda, coulda again, woulda, coulda, shoulda again. But when it doesn't happen, it sort of feels strange. And I don't think it's any accident that what stops the flow of woulda, coulda, shoulda is the word did, right? That's the shift that I think Frank and Linda did such a great job talking about, right? It's almost like taking the action, doing the thing, like Frank was saying, having some success, that changes not just the meaning of the poem, but the rhythm of the poem, right? Because for me, again, it feels like this poem just, it stops before you can repeat woulda, coulda, shoulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda, woulda, coulda, shoulda. Now, again, what I'm talking about here, this is like our lecture about rhythm and meter and syllables, right? So again, this is sort of more examples of how the structure of the poem is connected to the meaning or the feeling of the poem. But I'll say this again, if you are watching, if you're here with me or you're watching the recording and you're like, I don't really get, I don't fully understand, why does it matter 5 and 6 syllables? That's fine, right? But if what I'm saying is, what I'm suggesting is, part of the reason that you feel that change in the meaning is because the poet changed the number of syllables, because the poet changed the line length. And in this case, the poet introduced a very clear and very obvious rhyme in the last 2 lines. And I see your hand, Susanna, you'll be next. I just wanted to see, I've got 2 comments in the chat. Tahmina says, because by wishing will doing thing and not taking.
Hi, Professor.
Hi there.
Hi, Professor.
Hi, good
Sorry
to see you.
I come in late because I don't know why today internet doesn't work.
Yeah.
And right now I try too many times to come in your class. I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem. I know I don't know if it's for you guys, but WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram are out. Like the whole world is losing its mind. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, and I use the other phone and I can't, and use this phone again and canvas close and log out, log in again. So right now I can. Sorry about that.
No problem. Of course, go back, you know, I'll say go back and, you know, watch the recording when I post it, because we're just doing a sort of warm up. We're looking at a little poem here before I continue with
Okay.
with Emily Dickinson poem. But again, no problem. Very good to see you.
Okay, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Tahmina, I just want to make sure I see Tahmina and Aki and then Susanna's hand. Tahmina is saying, because by wishing will doing a thing and not taking action about it, the things will run away by not taking action and effort we can't achieve by wishing and not working. I think Tahmina's got the meaning of the poem perfect. Aki is saying, I think that eventually he or she didn't do anything. The persona, excellent job using structure words, Aki, thank you. The persona realized it, and then she thinks that tries to start something. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think when Aki and Tahmina there are saying is that last line, that last word in the poem, did, is a really big, important sort of transition moment in the poem, right? Absolutely. And again, not to keep saying the same thing, but what I hope you understand is that the meaning of the words help give you that feeling. The rhyme helps give you that feeling, and the number of syllables and the rhythm of the poem helps give you that feeling as well. Aki says yes in the chat. Okay, that's great. Susanna, what else do you want to add?
I just had a question with the did, because it talks about woulda, coulda, shoulda, and it ended up with the little did. So I was trying to make the connections, because it's like kind of first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines. It just talks about, should I do this? Would I do that? I could have do this or not do this, but in the last 2 lines, it's switching.
Yes, absolutely.
To the did. So I was trying to see if there is any purpose.
Oh, I think so. I think, you know, I think I said this again really quickly when I was talking about different styles of poems. You know, some poems, it'd be like comparing a research essay to a newspaper article, right? We have different expectations for that type of writing. Well, it's the same thing. Some poems have different feelings and different expectations. For example, some poems sort of require you, like Susanna was saying, to have this turn. So at the beginning of the poem, you explain some problem or some situation. And then at the end of the poem, the solution, right? Or the change. So to think about Susanna's question, I think even more, whether or not this poem sort of it has to do this, I think it's more like it's interesting to see, it's interesting to note, it's interesting to understand that something does change in those last two lines, right? And I'm suggesting, again, that comes from the rhyme, that comes from the number of syllables. And even if we look here, I don't think it's a mistake here. He capitalizes capital W woulda, capital C coulda, capital S shoulda. And he does this throughout the poem, but then the very last word we get is capital D did. And again, you know, he's a very sort of intelligent and playful poet. So I do think it's, again, really interesting, like sort of this could be part of, you know, my structural analysis of the poem. We get the word little right before capital D did. So I think it's almost like playful or funny or interesting to put the word little right before a big capital D, right? Again, that's part of, I think, part of all the feeling we're talking about, the change, the shift, the difference in the end of the final two lines, I think comes from all those choices. And again, you know, he's a good famous poet. You guys should look up more of his poems. We used 2 this semester. It's really fun. It's great for adults and for kids. He's just wonderful poet. I think all of these are choices, right? All of these choices affect how we read the poem as well. Linda, did I see you unmute yourself?
No.
Okay.
I was about to ask you why he put like a woulda, coulda, shoulda in a capital, and I think, in my opinion, I think he was trying to get the reader that says interesting, or get attention for these 2 words, because he was just stopping or cutting this poem with did.
I love it.
I don't know. I was just wondering why he put it like a capital in the end of his poem.
Let me ask you, what do we usually capitalize?
The first names or?
That's what I wanted. I was going to say first word in a sentence, boring. We capitalize names, and what else?
Countries, yeah.
Places. I think
places,
exactly correct.
Yeah.
And this goes, remember when Oscar was saying they? Oscar used a personal pronoun to talk about the woulda, coulda, shouldas. I think that's one reason that Oscar was already talking about they do this and they do that. That's that personification thing that we've talked about, right? It's almost like treating these things or these ideas like they were people. To me, that's what I think. I think it's almost like using a person's first name or last name. And that's that part of personifying. Imagine that if woulda, coulda, shouldas were people laying in the sun, talking, but never doing anything. So I think that's what I'd say. That's what I'd say, Linda. I think that's why we get capitalization there.
Thank you so much.
And I'm really happy, again, you know, this usually happens, but we've got, you know, I think almost 3 or 4 weeks of poetry now, and all these things start to come together, right? Like simile and metaphor, personification, and the rhythm and the sounds of the poem, counting syllables, stressed and unstressed, rhyme. It's just such a joy for me to be able to hear you guys talk about poems this way and ask these type of questions, because we didn't spend a ton of time with something like personification or metaphor and simile, but already you guys kind of get it, right? Like, wait, why is he capitalizing woulda, coulda, shoulda? Oh, that's because he's writing about them as if they were people, right? Hanging out, talking, doing nothing, relaxing. And then everything changes when the big capital D did arrives. And in that case, you know, the poem ends. I see in the chat, Andre says, I agree with Tahmina in the poem. Many wishes, but no even little doing. Yeah, lots of wouldas, lots of couldas, lots of shouldas, but not a lot of doing until the very end of the poem. Fantastic. I'm so pleased. I'm very.
I have a question.
It's Frank, get in here.
From one little did, this did mean nothing done, or they did something?
What do you think, Frank?
Nothing done.
Let me help you. I will tell you why you're wrong. No, there's no wrong. There's no wrong answers in poems, Frank. But let me tell you, I think that, again, those last two lines, just to make sure the meaning's clear here, right? I'll
Okay.
even say the last three lines. All those woulda, coulda, shouldas all ran away and hid from
Okay.
what little did. So we've got woulda, coulda, shouldas at the beginning of the poem. Line 2, they're laying in the sun. Line 3, they're talking about the things they woulda, coulda, shoulda done. But by the end of the poem, they all run away. They all hide because what happens is action, did, doing, right? So I think it's the opposite, Frank. I think when we actually do something, instead of, like Oscar was saying, imagining, thinking, worrying, what am I going to do? I should have done this. Oh, I could do that. I love what Oscar was saying. They don't exist, right? In the past, I should have done this thing. The past is done. The past is over, right?
Yeah.
Oh, tomorrow I could do, maybe you could, but it's not here, right? The future is not here. And this poem to me is really ends with that.
Dear, show me which word is still the, it's positive, which word you can tell they did.
I think that's an interesting question, Frank. So how do we know that did is positive here? I think it's because did is the thing that makes woulda, coulda, shoulda run away and hide, right?
Okay.
Did is the thing that changes everything. Now,
Okay.
now I don't know, Frank. I mean, like I said, in poetry, we get to express our feelings. It doesn't have to be one perfect answer. Maybe there is a maybe there is a human being out in the world who thinks that it's a happy thing or a good thing to lay around and go, I should have done this thing. But usually that's not the path to happiness, you know, thinking about what could have been or what you should have done. I think this poem is asking us to think about that, Frank. Instead of thinking, I could do this, I should do this, I think it's sort of saying it's all about what you actually do, right? Or all about what actually happens, instead of, I'm going to keep thinking about Oscar's point there, about things that don't actually exist. They only exist up here in the mind. You know what I'm saying?
Should I think about the hit is against the did or something like this?
Tell me more about the word against there, Frank. That's very interesting.
Means hid means something hide or disappear.
But what is hiding? In this poem, Frank, look at line 5. What is
woulda, coulda, shoulda
exactly
was disappear.
Exactly. You just said it perfectly. You just said it perfectly. The woulda, coulda, shouldas disappear when or how? When we actually do something. When
just one thing that to get all the settled.
Exactly.
Find the solution.
Exactly right. And Aki says in the chat, is the persona in the poem, is he regretting? That's an interesting question. I don't know if he is actually regretting. I do think, though, that the poet, the persona, is asking the reader to think about would have, could have, should have, right? In the context of regretting. I do think that when you see the word woulda, coulda, shoulda, and it's a little bit of an idiom for sure, like we said in poetry, there's always some cultural stuff that is difficult for second, third, fourth, fifth English language speakers. But woulda, coulda, shoulda, you could say sometimes it's about regrets, Aki. You absolutely could. Like if I say, oh, I wish, 10 years ago, I wish that I had bought my house in whatever, in this city, blah, blah, blah. You could say that that's kind of like regretting something, right? So yeah, there is a little bit of cultural and a little bit of idiom going on in this poem for sure, for sure. But I don't know if the persona here is actually regretting something. I think, again, for me, my feeling is, I think he's suggesting to the reader, hey, you reader, you don't have to regret things. You don't have to think woulda, coulda, shoulda. You can do, right? You can focus on your action instead of feeling regrets or thinking about what coulda, woulda, shoulda happened. Does that make sense, Aki? I hope so. Anybody else before we wrap up with this poem? I know I called this a warm-up, but you guys had great things to say. Anybody else have thoughts or ideas about this poem?
It is one standard 7 lines.
Interesting. Frank is asking, is this standard? I don't think that, yeah, good question. This isn't an example of like a classic style. So this isn't like a famous poetry style in English. I think this is just the way that the poet chose for this specific poem, Frank. Great question. Yeah.
Okay.
And Aki says, yes, I see, I got it. Excellent. That makes me very happy. Thank you, Aki. Okay, so just for time, I'm going to move on. This poem will be, of course, in the PowerPoint. I'll post it to Canvas as soon as we are done today. But remember, what we just did is basically what I'm asking you to do for your poetry project, right? We kind of did a combination here of poetry, response, and analysis. So this is my sort of one-stop shop slide for you guys. This is a sort of one-slide review of what we've done for the last few weeks. Remember, in our response questions, I'm just asking you to think about Professor Noor's 3 questions. And again, Aki was asking about the persona in the poem. So what happens to the persona? Is there a central object or metaphor? And how does the poem end, right? For example, in the poem we just did, I think that the woulda, coulda, shouldas are the central object. What happens at the end? They run away and hide, right? And why does this happen? Well, we talked about it. And remember, for our structural analysis, you have to do both in your essay. You get to respond, so you get to talk about your own personal feelings, but you also must talk about things like lines and stanzas and a gem and caesura and sounds and rhythm and meter and all that fun stuff, right? So again, in this slide, when we counted the number of syllables and when we talked about how the final 2 lines change, lines 6 and 7, now we're doing much more sort of structural analysis examples instead of just talking about, you know, the persona and what happens at the end of the poem. So this is my, like I said, sort of very short summary of what I'm asking you to do for, excuse me, for your poetry project. Are there any questions before I start to introduce the structure of a literary analysis paper? Any questions about poetry?
Peace, peace.
Peace. 3, 2, 1, peace, peace, peace. Yeah, that's my countdown. If you do have questions, you know what to do. Type it in the chat, unmute yourself and ask. But I did want to talk about a literary essay. Now, again, partly I'm doing this now. I'm starting now because, excuse me, in the past, I have tried to do one big lecture to talk about the structure of an essay like this. And it's very slow and it's very painful. So I'm going to do this 3 different classes. So I'm going to do the what it's like to write an introduction for a literary essay today. Next week, I'll talk about the body paragraphs. And then the week after that, we'll talk about the conclusion. Okay. Now, remember, for your literary or for your poetry project, excuse me, I'm not asking you to use a very formal or specific essay structure. Remember that example, sort of casual example, is already there for you in Canvas. And just to make sure everybody knows where to find this here on the poetry project page, remember, I'm still asking you to use MLA formatting here, right? I still want Times New Roman 12-point font double space, but you can absolutely just, you know, use one header to call response, one for analysis. You can absolutely do your poetry project this way, okay? But for the second major essay, I'm asking you to use a literary analysis structure. And I want to look at an example of that today and start answering questions about it. So things that you must do for your literary analysis essay, which is, you know, we're halfway through the semester. So, you know, you got 8 more weeks to prepare. But in the introduction paragraph, here's what you've got to do, and then we're going to look at some examples together. So 1, introduce the book, poem, and author being analyzed. You must do this in the first paragraph, right? If you're going to analyze Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson, you got to put that in the very first paragraph to introduce it to the reader, okay? Then you should provide context for the book, poem, and author. So this could include what country the author's from, what city they're from, the year of publication, any historical information, right? And there's lots of different ways to do this, and I'm going to show you an example right now. Then you need to introduce the main idea or the theme that you will analyze in your essay. And this is an academic style, right? So you are going to finish your introduction paragraph or paragraphs, plural, with your thesis statement. Now, this is a specific argument about the main idea that you've identified up here, right? Now, as always, I think the best way to do this is to look at some examples together. So I just wanted to show you in Canvas. If we go to the home page, I've already got the document that I'm going to use here up for you under live support materials, as always. And you see here we are October 4th. This document is titled Literary Analysis, Introduction Paragraph Examples. Okay. And you know I'm just going to click it. I'm to download it. Now, the reason that I don't have us write a full, deeply detailed and academic analysis of poetry is because it's very challenging. And if we remember from some of the lessons in Canvas, a big challenge with poetry is ambiguity. Can someone please remind me what ambiguity is? What is something if it's ambiguous or there is ambiguity?
Something that has 2 meanings.
Thank you, Oscar. I was going to say, I will wait. I'm fine to wait till someone answers, but Oscar, absolutely perfect. It maybe has 2 meanings, maybe more than that, right? Maybe 2, 3, 4, we don't even know, right? It's unclear. It's unclear if something is ambiguous. And for so many people, they will tell you that they hate poetry because poetry is ambiguous, right? It's not clear, right? The poet doesn't say, hey, this is a poem about XYZ. The reader has to do a little work, right? And I want to show you an example of this. And I will say, this idea of ambiguity is still kind of true in fiction. Now, in a longer book, right, we're going to read 2 books for the rest of the semester. This is a short little book. There are going to be some very clear sort of main ideas or big themes that we can talk about, right? But at the same time, with any story, again, like we talked about at the beginning of the semester, the hero's journey sort of idea, people can take different meaning from the same story. And part of that is because of ambiguity. Part of that is cultural. Part of that is each individual person's different experience. But I wanted to show you 2 examples of this using the Emily Dickinson poem from last week. And I realize I should we'll read this again. I think everybody knows this. Many of you already did your practice assignment here with it. But just to make sure for people who are watching the recording, we talked about this in great detail last week. So again, if you're watching going, what are we talking about? Watch the recording from last week, please. But I'm going to show you 2 different examples of an introduction paragraph to a literary analysis style essay of this poem. So I want to make sure we go through it again. So remember, we're analyzing Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land And on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity, it asked a crumb of me. So again, we talked about this last week. We did a sort of response and analysis, but here's some example of what a full literary analysis would look like. Again, remember, I'm always going to show you MLA formatting. You should all be doing this every single assignment in college for the rest of your life. So just pointing it out here. And I'll read this for, yeah, I'll read it. You guys, yeah. So here is an example of one style of literary analysis essay for this poem that you've already written about. So for example, Emily Dickinson and the Fight for Women's Rights. So it may be difficult to imagine nowadays, but in the early 1830s in the United States of America, there were very few women poets. In fact, there were very few women authors of any kind. For example, Emily Dickinson, who is now regarded as one of the most important American poets in history, was almost entirely unknown. Even though she wrote almost 2,000 poems when she was alive, only 10 or so were ever published. And it was only after her death that people became aware of her talent. Her now famous poem, Hope is the Thing with Feathers, was written in 1861, and it offers insight into the difficulty that she must have felt as a brilliant female poet in a time when women were not able to achieve the great levels of success available to their male counterparts. The central symbol of the poem, a bird that can survive in the most difficult of circumstances, represents the difficulty that women faced at this point in American history. Okay, now notice last week, none of us said that this was a poem about women's rights, right? None of us said that last week. We just did our response and we talked about the structure of the poem. Now, again, this is why the literary analysis paper is the next level for us, right? Now, I'm going to talk all about these two examples, but I just want to show you a second example of this to again, get you prepared for your essay at the end of the semester. So same thing. And then again, I'm going to go back to my slides here to notice some of this structural stuff we talked about. Now, here's another example. Same thing, you know, same style, but Emily Dickinson and America's Darkest Hour. The middle of the 19th century was a very difficult time for many people in the United States of America. In the year 1861, the US was on the verge of a civil war that would kill over 1 million people and wound hundreds of thousands more. Many artists, authors, and poets tried to make sense of this difficult time in American history, and Emily Dickinson was no exception. In 1861, she wrote a famous poem titled Hope is the Thing with Feathers. In the poem, she compares hope to a bird that always sings a beautiful song, even in the most difficult of circumstances. It is no coincidence that the poem was written in 1861, because this is the same year that the US Civil War began. Therefore, the central symbol of the poem, a bird that can survive in the most difficult of circumstances, represents the fear and difficulty that millions of Americans felt at the beginning of this painful moment in American history. Now, here's my not fair question to you guys, but I'm still going to ask it. Which one of these is true?
The last one.
Frank says the last one. Which one of these is true?
Both.
Susanna, Oscar, and Susanna. Susanna's taken, I think, 3 classes with me. She knows the answer is always both. Now, this is why again, I like to go slowly here, right? Because the real answer is both can be true. When we're talking about literary analysis, and again, we're going to read much more about this. I'm just introducing it to us today. This is why we talk about ambiguity so much, right? In art, in poetry, in literature, ambiguity is going to be a part of it, right? It's absolutely going to be a part of it. So we can sort of do our, Andre says both and Aki says both. Again, you guys have been with me long enough now, you know, right? So if I go back to my slide here, I want to emphasize something, then we'll start to sort of look at the structure here. When I say in this third bullet point, you guys, introduce the main idea or the theme that you will analyze in your essay, this is what I mean here, right? We've got two different example paragraphs looking at the same exact poem, but one we could call is sort of an analysis of women's rights or feminism or gender studies, right? We could say, oh, you know, in my introduction paragraph, I'm telling you that the main idea of this poem is women, 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 right? Or in the second example, I could say, no, this poem is about war and fighting and American history and sort of hope during very difficult moments in history, right? And again, which one could be correct? Both. Now, next week, we'll talk about how to write body paragraphs that are clear and strong and effective, right? Because after you make this claim, right, after you have your thesis statement like this, now you've got to be able to show evidence. You've got to be able to find examples in the poem that support, or in the novel, right, in the novel. Because I'll tell you right now, again, whether you're here with me or watching the recording, we could analyze this book from a few different points of view. You'll notice right away, there's some gender stuff in this book. There's some rich people versus poor people stuff in this book, right? There's a lot of stuff in this book. But when we do a full literary analysis, it's your job as the writer to be very clear and focus on one thing. And, you know, as you continue, if you ever take another literature class at ARC or afterwards, you might hear this referred to as sort of a lens of analysis or a critical lens, right? Or even a theory of literary analysis that you could look at. Different teachers will use different phrases to talk about this type of analysis. But the idea here is the same, right? When you're analyzing a piece of literature, you need to make a choice. You need to make a choice about how you're going to do that. And that's what we're doing, right? That's what we're doing. Does this, now I want to look at these, I want to start with the first example to talk about sort of my structure lesson here. But does what I just said make sense? And if it doesn't, let's stop and slow down before we do a more sentence for sentence analysis here. Frank, does that make sense? Since you said you like the interpretation about the US Civil War, does this make sense why both could be right?
Yeah,
Okay.
you're talking about the, the two example. I don't get it. I'm sorry. I missed your question, please.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. I was saying, Frank, you said you like number 2, right? You like you like the Civil War, right? But I want to make sure after I was talking there for, you know, a few minutes, does it make sense why both could be correct with this type of?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, those are correct in history.
Good.
Where she lived.
I'll take that. I'll take that. Anybody else, any ideas or questions about this type of analysis and why both of these could be choices that you make if you were going to write a literary analysis essay?
Basically, you have to do a research before starting to do the work, because
it will help. It will help. Yeah. Now, again, you know how I do this. Next week, in addition to talking about literary structure, I'm going to introduce the book. I'm not going to teach you everything you need to know about this book, right? But I will give you some context for who is John Steinbeck and when did he write this book. And, you know, I will give you some of that information because I think it's important to understand. But you're absolutely correct, Susanna. Part of the expectation for this type of writing is, as I say here, right, is you do need to provide some context for the book or the poem and the author. And you're absolutely correct, Susanna, that's not going to be in the book, usually. If it's a novel, right, it's not going to be in the book. Absolutely.
When I was doing a research on this poem, you know, I found the poem and it was in 3 stanzas. But you put it in your one stanza. I was like, should I write about it or no? I was like, okay, I'll just let it go because I want to know who is she, because I don't know her. It's
Yeah.
always good to know before starting the paper. So I don't know. I submitted in some weird way.
No, please. And Emily Dickinson is an interesting example because, as I say in my example paragraph here, most of her poems were published after she died. So different editions, different publications, way after she was dead, maybe changed how many stanzas, how many lines. And that's a whole other thing we could talk about, right? The politics of publishing and how do things change over time. Absolutely, absolutely. And I see a comment in the chat here. I choose 1 point, right? Aki saying, I choose 1 point. Yes, we're still weeks away, Aki. You've got a poetry paper to write, but for your literary analysis paper, right, when we analyze the novel, you'll choose 1. I don't want to read, essays that are like, this book, the main idea of this book is about gender and class and history and da. No, the expectation is for this type of essay, you choose 1, and then you do your body paragraphs, your analysis paragraphs, always go back to that 1 theme that you choose, right? Absolutely great question, Aki. Okay, good. Cool. Anybody else before we go? Let's look at some. So let's do this. Let's look at some. So remember, first I say introduce the book, poem, and author being analyzed. When we look at our examples here, where does I want to go to this one. In this first paragraph, first example, where do I introduce the author and the work? Well, do I introduce the author and the title of the poem being analyzed?
Yes, you did.
Where?
For
Yes,
example,
Good. So how about someone either tell me or type in the chat, give me the example. How and where do I introduce the author and the name of the poem?
I think it's the second or the third one. Where is it? It says, for example, Emily Dickinson, who is now.
I totally agree. I'm going to make this yellow. Good. And where do we get the title of the poem?
the Hope, the poem Hope.
Excellent. Good.
4 lines down.
Good. And again, more just examples. You're gonna see example of these type of essays. Just again, I think it's helpful for you guys. Again, you're all high-level students, but to see examples of introductory phrases, introductory elements that you can use to introduce these things. This is important. So just more things for you to see. Okay, so here where I say introduce, I'm gonna make this yellow. So hopefully we can see where, excuse me. We can match the colors up here. So introduce the book, poem, and author being analyzed. We did, we did that here. Emily Dickinson and the title of the poem. How about here in the second? Provide context for the book, poem, and author. This could include the country, the city, the year of publication, historical information. I'm going to choose to make this green. So where do I do this in my example? This is the context for the poem. Give me some examples, you guys.
1869.
Thank you.
That year.
Excellent. Where else?
In the first line, 1830,
Thank you. 1830s. And what else?
United States.
Thank you so much. United States of America. Thank you. Who else? I hear different voices. Who else?
It's basically pretty much you talk about in every line.
Yes, now Susanna's saying something really important here, right? Absolutely. So in my slide here, when I talk about, hey, you need to give me, I'm going to keep saying me since it's me for this class and I'm giving you the grade. You need to give me context. If you look at the first paragraph, is there a little bit of context or a lot of context?
A lot.
So, right? So again, anytime you see numbers, so I've got some more context. She wrote 2,000 poems. Only 10 were published. Do we get other important context? I mean, I'd say this whole thing about women authors is context, because before I even get to my thesis, which we'll look at next, I'm giving you background context about women writing in general before I even talk about Emily Dickinson, right? Any other examples of context that I can make green for us here? I think we got most of it, right? Okay. How about the next one then? So after you introduce the book, poem, and author, after you provide context, which includes the country, maybe the city, the year of publication, some historical information, you need to introduce the main idea or the theme that you, like Aki was asking about, you choose one theme, right? So you need to introduce the main idea or theme that you will analyze in your essay. Where do I do this in this paragraph here? I want to be very specific with this one. I do think it's a specific sentence. Aki says the last sentence. Does anybody else have a different idea? Where do I, before I introduce the thesis, Aki, before the thesis, I need to introduce the theme, the main idea, which is pretty clear.
Is home.
Good. And I think hopefully it's pretty clear. This is the theme
Yeah.
I'm choosing here, right? But there's a sentence where I introduce this too. Where is it? Where is it? Where do I start to connect the context and the specific poem?
Before the thesis?
Yes. So give me a few words. Where does it start, Oscar?
Let's see.
Where it says the women were not able to achieve the great level of success.
Where is that? That's in line.
Put it down.
9.
Even though she wrote only after her death, her now famous poem.
Line 9, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Susanna was saying great levels of success. I think it even starts, I'm being picky here because I want to make sure we're clear. I think it even starts, I think that this introduction of the theme and the main idea, like we're talking about here, starts even earlier in that sentence. Where, does anyone else?
Her now famous.
Even though, I
Even
don't know.
though-
No, no, not this one.
Uh-uh.
And it was only her death.
It is, I'm being very specific here. I'm fishing. It is in this sentence though. Someone tell me where the turn happens. Where do I turn to the theme of women and gender with Emily Dickinson specifically?
That's the one it says in the difficulty that she must have felt as a brilliant female. It's not starting.
Good, I like it. I'm being picky, like I said, because I think
It kind of talks about it. You know, it's starting. It's kind of introducing the problem.
Yep.
And it goes. That's why it's.
Yeah, and of course, again, even though I'm trying to make things as clear as possible, and of course, even students always love to say, Jeff, like this one sentence must represent this one thing. Of course, it's not this simple, you guys, right? When I highlight something in blue, that doesn't mean, oh, this is the only example of introducing the main idea. But I do think that this type of analysis is helpful to understand how you can put together your paragraphs, right? It's just good to see. Again, my intention is always to help you guys make clear choices with your sentences. Instead of going like, I need to put this idea somewhere, I'm gonna kind of put it here. I want you to feel comfortable and confident that you know what you're doing when you're doing it, right? So that's why we're kind of going word for word here. So I think we get context in green. We get the author's name and the poem. And then after, again, another thing I'm trying to help you notice is after context, after the author and the work that we are analyzing, then we get the introduction of the, then we get the introduction of the theme. Little Emily Dickinson at the table hanging out. So here, after we get this context, we get this big switch. It, by the way, what's the pronoun it here? What am I referring back to with this pronoun? Her now famous poem, Hope is the Thing with Feathers, was written in 1861, and it offers insight.
It's for her poem?
Exactly right, Linda. Exactly right. And I'm being clear about this again because in this clause, right, in this clause, I'm starting to make a specific argument or to share a specific idea about the poem instead of just giving general information about the background, the history, and the context. Right? So again, that's why I'm being very detail oriented here. And now where is my thesis? I think Oscar already said it, Aki already said it. So after I introduce the theme, then I've got a very clear and specific thesis statement. As it says here, finish the introduction paragraph or paragraphs with your thesis, a specific argument about the main idea. I'm going to make this pink. So if this is my paper, I am arguing what? What am I arguing about the poem? Right? Really what I'm sort of saying is this poem is about women's rights. Like I said, if you go online, you guys, you can absolutely find example essays where authors will argue that this poem is about women's rights, right? But the thing that I want to, again, keep stressing and keep planting in your mind as we continue this semester is you've got to make that argument in your analysis, in your essay, right? You've got to be very clear and specific. So if you think the essay is about women's rights and gender equality, you've got to say it. You can't just assume the reader agrees with you, right? And so that's why, again, I'm sort of saying here, and we're looking at two examples. You've got to choose the theme. You've got to choose the thing you want to focus on, the lens, the sort of critical framework. Again, different teachers could use different words here, but you've got to choose that framework, that lens, and then you've got to make a specific argument connected to that theme, to that lens, to that framework. We're going to do the same thing for the second paragraph here. But does this make some sense about when I say, hey, here's the structure of an introduction paragraph in a literary analysis essay? Does this make sense about how I did it in this first example? Susanna says thumbs up. That makes me happy.
Yeah.
I'd love to see, Linda, was someone?
Yeah, I said yes.
Excellent. Thank you,
But
Linda.
I worried about the argument. Like you said here, for the last last thing, the last required, it should be argument, a specific argument, right?
Yes, yes.
But it's gotta be whatever you choose, right? Whatever you feel like.
Yeah.
Every answer is correct.
I mean, yes, and right. So hope is if someone says to me, hope is if a student wanted to make an argument that says, for example, Hope is the Thing with Feathers is a poem all about how Facebook is ruining life in the year 2021. That would be a very hard argument to make, right? Now, I'd be interested in it. That sounds very interesting to me. But whatever you choose should be, please, Lord, inshallah, si Dios quiere, connected to the words in the poem. Right now, this is why next week we're going to talk about how to take specific quotes and examples from the poem to prove your thesis, right? So Susanna's partially right? Whatever you want. Like I said, if you want to analyze this book, just to prepare you, that it's about how rich people are cruel to the poor people that they work with. You could make that argument. If you wanted to make an argument about this book, this is a book that is all about how family is the most important thing in life, and some modern society wants to break apart family. You could make that argument, right? But if you wanted to make an argument that this book is about, social media and its effect on modern society, that would be a very difficult argument to make, considering that the book was published before the invention of computers and the internet. Does that make sense, Linda?
A little bit. I'm sorry, but
Why I asked this question? Because Linda asked a question. So my question was on her question.
yeah, because I didn't ask you, just like a jump and ask, and I didn't like get to ask him.
Because when you already pointed out the woman's right, so it was like the one piece and another one was a war about the war, American war. So I knew it, like someone will not get this. So basically, like if you're analyzing the book, this was my, this was my question. So when you're analyzing your book, there is gonna be like a lot of thesis, right? Like you said in a pearl, like the book.
Possible, a lot of possible.
Possible. So if you analyze one, it's not making you incorrect, like wrong, if you're not analyzing the second one, like the other one, right?
Yes. And was that, I'm sorry, Linda, was that your question or that was Susanna?
No.
Okay.
No,
Linda,
that was Susanna's question. I was starting to ask you, and you just she asked, and then you answer her questions, I think.
I get excited, Linda. I'm sorry. Please ask your question and I will answer your question. I promise. Tell me again.
No, it's just my concern is about argument, right? And I know how to write an essay about argument, because you should give some argue things, and then to approve this, and then a lot of things, just one part, but it has a lot of details, correct?
Yes.
But
Yeah, so my
argument here,
Hold on, Susanna, I'm going to mute you. I love and respect you, but hold on. Linda, continue.
yeah, and this is like an essay. It's about the literary, right? It's not argument. Or
I see what you're saying. I think partly, okay, I'm going to answer, and then Linda, if I don't, keep asking, okay? But
I'm sorry, Professor, took this inconvenience, but I just I want to make everything clear so I can write a good essay or good thing.
You know me. This is not an
Yeah, I know you. Yeah.
at all. This is what I love to do. Okay, I think often in many ESL classes, ESL textbooks, it's very possible, Linda, that someone said this is an argumentative essay, right? Like an argument essay. Yes. Okay. Now, this type of writing, a literary analysis, it's not like a classic ESL argument essay, but those skills that you practice there will help you, because whatever you choose to write about, like I said, if you're going to choose to write about poor people and rich people, you're not making a really clear argument about that. Here's, how could I say this? Hold on. I'm going to slow down, Jeff. Slow down. The argument comes when you choose which theme you're going to write about. Because exactly right, Linda, because if you choose to write about poor people and rich people, then you need to prove to me that is the theme, that is the most important part of the book. If you choose to write about the family and relationships between children and their parents, then in your body paragraphs, again, which we'll talk about next week, you need to explain, prove to me why this book is connected to that main idea, right? And again, this is why I'm gonna stop. Does that help a little bit, Linda?
Yes, Professor. Yes, thank you so much.
So you don't need to make an argument like, for example, there's a character in this book. You don't need to make an argument. You don't need to make an argument saying that the main character's name in this book is Kino, K-I-N-O. You don't need to make an argument like Kino is a kind and generous man, and here are 3 reasons why he is kind and generous. It's not that type of argument, right? What you need to do is take a clear choice about the framework, the lens, the idea you're going to use to analyze the book, and then support that analysis, right?
Yes.
That's more what we're doing in this essay.
Yeah, I got it now. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Perfect. Thank you for your patience while I figured out what your real question was. Anybody else with any other great, amazing questions like Linda's? I saw in the chat. Sanad says, I love the analysis. It made me know more information about some things we read. Great. Andre says, Emily Dickinson, women's rights means LGBT history. No, maybe Andre Googled something online. So there are some scholars who will argue that Emily Dickinson was a gay woman. We don't know. Maybe yes, maybe no. So if you are going to write an analysis of Emily Dickinson's poems saying that she was a gay, unmarried woman, again, very interesting. You could get very famous doing that. People have. But you'd have to make sure you provide evidence to support that analysis, right? And I'm going to keep thinking about I'm going to keep thinking about argumentative writing in the context of literary analysis. I do think that they're really closely connected, but again, I think for so many of us in ESL classes, it's a little bit of a different writing style. So there is a connection there. There really, really is. So Andre's saying it means LGBT history. In this paragraph we're looking at now, Andre, no, it does not. But I'm sure there are many books out there doing a sort of analysis, framework, critical lens about sexuality in Emily Dickinson's poems, right? Or US history in Emily Dickinson's poems, or women's rights in Emily Dickinson's poems, right? So this is Linda's down here. That's why I keep pointing at her on my screen. That's why Linda's question about the argument is important, right? If you're going to argue that these poems are about sexuality, you better have some good evidence, right? And that could be very interesting. That could be absolutely wonderful, but you just need to make sure you've got the evidence. You've got the evidence. Let's look at the next one just for more practice, right? So again, if we think about Linda's question about arguments, I'd say this example paragraph, the argument would be, this poem is about women in American history. In the second example, I'd say that the argument is, this poem is about American history, right? So let's look again at the examples. We're going to do introducing the book and the poem in yellow. So where do I introduce the book and the poem here in this paragraph? Don't think too hard on this one, you guys.
It's the second line, first line, 19th century.
Remember, introduction first. Before context, I just want to identify, where do I put the author's name and the title?
In 4th line, and Emily Dickens was no. Yeah.
Good. And again, why I'm asking you to be very specific. Notice in this example here, you don't need to introduce them in the first sentence. In this one, I have her name in the third sentence. Here I have the title of the poem further down, further down in the paragraph. In this one, I've got the author's name and the title of the poem, 3 or 4 lines down here. So again, things I'm trying to point your attention to. You don't need to just start your very first topic sentence or your hook or whatever we call these now. You don't need to just say, I'm going to write about Emily Dickinson's poem, The Hope is the Thing with Feathers, right? We can have a little more sort of style when we're writing our own essay here, right? Great. And how about context? I think Susanna was starting to talk about context, but context is green. So country, city, year of publication. Where do we see that in this example essay?
In the first line, in the United States.
Of course, numbers are a big clue, right? 19th century, United States of America, 1861. Here I've got the US, the Civil War. Even this, I think, before we introduce Emily Dickinson, notice I've got, pardon me, I introduce artists in general and authors in general before we even get to her name, right? Many artists, authors, and poets tried to make sense of this difficult time in America, and Emily Dickinson also did this thing, right? And 1861. Good. How about blue? Now, where do we introduce the main idea or the theme? Remember, here we are connecting the specific ideas that are introduced in the context with the author and the book that we are looking at. So where do I do that in this paragraph? Where do I, and again, I'm going to keep using, where do I make the turn? Where do I start to connect the theme in this paragraph? I'd say I'm asking for one specific sentence where I connect context and the poem together.
In this poem, she compares hope to a bird.
In this poem, she compared, this is tricky. Okay, so Linda's saying this one.
Till the Ethel song.
I like next line.
Okay, maybe we could say both, right? I think, like I was saying, maybe Frank, can you tell me why did you choose this sentence? Why do you like it even more?
Because it says the history and how poem is, it says it's coincidence.
Exactly.
So
right.
you can connect the hope and the history put together.
I love it, Frank. And again, here, it's hard to do this word for word, but I still think it's helpful to see, right? Here again, I've got, oh, this should be green, excuse me. We can sort of see how these things come together, right? In this sentence, I'm making an argument because I've got this specific poem that we're analyzing. I'm referring back to or including more context that I already wrote about above. And I'm sort of, again, you know, I love baseball. I use my metaphor a lot. I'm getting ready to like wind up and let it go, right? Because, you know, we see here's going to be the thesis statement right below it. But I think you're right, Linda. I mean, in the poem, she compares hope to a bird that always sings a beautiful song. The only reason I might say that this isn't part of the sort of introduction of the theme, this is almost like a mini summary, right? This isn't a full summary, but it is somewhere between summarizing and giving context, right? The author is sort of saying, here's what she's writing about in the poem. That's a little bit different than saying, here's what the poem means, right? Or here's how the poem is connected to this context. Those are slightly different things, right? Those are slightly different things. And then where's our thesis statement?
Therefore.
Thank you. Just like usual, again, good news for people who have taken lots of ESL classes. We still want your thesis statement as the last sentence. Your introduction might be longer at this level, right? Your introduction might be 2 or 3 paragraphs, but you're going to want to end that introduction section of your paper, boom, with your very clear and specific thesis here. Good. Excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Questions, ideas. I'm throwing a lot at you here, but again, that's why I've tried to break this up into different lectures. Like I said, in the past, I tried to teach the whole structure in one class and it was very difficult. This is just the introduction, right? We're going to see more about this later, but these different, the sort of the jobs that you have to do in your introduction. Does this make some sense, or what are your questions looking at these?
In this project is, are you talking about we can choose a book or a poem? What would you like to do?
Well, it's gonna be up to you, Frank. You will choose either The Pearl or The Lathe of Heaven. One of our 2 books that we'll read, you will choose.
So I choose one of the book you said.
You will choose one of the 2 books. And again, this paper is going to be due in like 6 weeks. I'm getting you ready, right? I'm giving us lots of time to study. You'll have plenty of time, but you will get to choose. If you want to write a literary analysis of The Pearl, you can do that. My Lathe of Heaven book is upstairs. If you want to write an analysis of The Lathe of Heaven, you can do that. So you will choose one of the 2 novels, not poems. The poetry project is the one that we do for our poetry section.
Oh, okay. Oh, gotcha. All right. Thank you.
Question, Frank. What else? Who else? I've got one little small activity to help us think about this. Okay, I'm gonna go back. We talked about this a little bit last 2 classes ago. Excuse me, not last week. But do we remember this poem? Oh, excuse me, I did the wrong. I didn't. I wanted to zoom in, not make things bigger. Again, we looked at this poem 2 weeks ago. And 2 weeks ago, we talked about this poem in the context of simile and metaphor, right? Because this beautiful, wonderful, important poem in American history, right, is rich, full of metaphor, simile, and symbolism. But let me open up my other slide here. I wanted to show you this. I think it's here. Or it might be the one. Give me 1 second, you guys, while I open this file. There we go. Okay. So remember, part of thinking about this type of literary analysis, I'm going to close this PowerPoint and close this PowerPoint. I'm actually just going to copy this slide and I'm going to put it in today's PowerPoint. Okay. So this poem, you remember we talked about it from a couple weeks ago. Hold on, I'm gonna, I see Andre has a question in the chat. Andre says, if you write your own poem, do you show how to do it or can I write it in freestyle? Andre, if you write your own poem for the poetry project, you write whatever you want, however you want to do it. You don't need to worry about any of this literary analysis stuff. For the poetry project, just write whatever you want to write. And then after you write it, you can analyze your own poems for the sounds and the structure and some of those other things that we've talked about. Okay. I hope that answered your question. Okay, I see Andre says okay in the chat. Okay, now just to finish up today, we've got about 20 minutes. Feels heavy. We might even end a few minutes early. We'll see how it goes. But here's our poem. Remember, I'll read it again, but we talked about this in the context of simile and metaphor. But now let's start to connect this to context before we finish today. So this poem is called Harlem, and it's by Langston Hughes. So the poem Harlem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Now imagine that you wanted to do a literary analysis of this poem. Here's some basic context. Again, remember, context is important when we're thinking about literary analysis. Here's some important context about the author, right? So Langston Hughes was born in Joplin, Missouri. He was born in 1901 and died in 1967. He moved to New York City as a young man. He lived in Harlem and is strongly associated with the Harlem Renaissance. He represented the voices of Black Americans who'd only been freed from slavery 30 years before. Black Americans who were not able to leave the South were also still experiencing tremendous prejudice, and most Black people were not able to vote until the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1965, 2 years before Langston Hughes' death. His poetry is often described as writing jazz poetry because it used some of the same rhythms and meter of jazz music, rich with repeated themes, driving rhythm, and surprising improvisation. Now, again, even just with this very basic sort of really entry-level context, you guys, and remember, Harlem is a neighborhood. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Harlem is a neighborhood in New York City. Can we make some guesses? Can we start to, we're just sort of practicing now, you guys, but how could we start to connect these things about context, excuse me, and the meaning of this poem? So we've got New York City, Black Americans, Harlem is a Black neighborhood in New York City, Black poet. Could we start to make some guesses about what's going on in this poem with that kind of context? Aki in the chat says discrimination. Good. Aki's really helping us out. And here's my hint too. If the first line in this poem is, what happens to a dream deferred? Now that I've shown you some of this context, what do you think the dream is? What's the dream? Could we make some guesses?
Maybe about rights or.
Good. Good. Tell me some more, Linda. Can you say a little bit more? Rights? Can you say any more, Linda?
Yeah, I'm thinking about some words like that kind of related to rights, but more specific. Like I think it's about rights or
Good.
something that like a justice maybe.
I love it. And justice for all people, all Americans, people in
like
China,
a Black people, let's say.
and Black people in China, Black people in Mexico, Black
Yeah.
people in
New York.
I would thank you very much. In Harlem, in New York City.
New York
right?
City.
What's the title of the poem? Absolutely.
Harlem.
Good. Frank, you want to get in there?
Probably like yes, same right what the white people has. So it's against discrimination actually.
Excellent, 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 excellent. Good. So now we're talking about, Aki was talking about discrimination. Frank was talking about white people's rights, Black people's rights. Linda was talking about fighting for justice. Again, a very powerful and strong word. And again, all of those things, you guys, came when I asked, what is the dream? Now, without some context, maybe we don't know what the dream is. Maybe we just think, oh, it's that weird dream that I had about my friend and we were at the grocery store and I bought 12 eggs and then they fell on the floor. No, right? It's not that type of dream. Or you could write a literary analysis saying that it's just about an everyday dream, but that would probably be a difficult analysis paper to write, right? Good.
Does he have a connection to Martin Luther King?
That would be something very interesting and important to research for your paper, Frank. I think that's a great question. See, but again, I'm not even trying to be silly about it. That is a great question that comes from context. So for your literary analysis paper, you could try to find, let's do that. I mean, we've got the time. And now again, I want to be very careful here. We haven't talked too much about Tahmina's talking about racism. Notice one thing that is so difficult for students is this a good reference or not? Is it a reputable site? I'll tell you right now, the Smithsonian is a well-known organization, right? So again, you guys might not know that. We could do a whole, in W340 and in English 300. Hopefully, you did some analysis of the quality of a source, right? But the Smithsonian is a very strong source. And if you notice in Frank's question, in his speeches, MLK carefully evoked the poetry of Langston Hughes. But then we get this. That's one of my favorite sounds as a teacher, Frank. That was a gift.
Wow.
Now, notice also, to avoid being labeled a communist sympathizer, King had to distance himself from Hughes, but he still managed to challenge the controversial poet. Now from Frank's question already, we're getting whoa, 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 whoa. Dr. King and Langston Hughes, okay, but communism and the controversy and wait a minute, what's going on here, right? Now, again, for a full research paper, you could look at this article, we could read it together, and you could start to make some of these excellent connections, Frank. But I just want to make sure, again, for everybody who's here, anyone watching on the recording, thank you, Frank, because that is an example of the type of wonderful question that will come when we start to connect the literature with our own sort of critical questions, right? With our own sort of critical questions, absolutely. So maybe we'll just read a little bit, then we'll stop. For years, Martin Luther King Jr. and poet Langston Hughes maintained a friendship, exchanging letters and favors and even traveling to Nigeria together in 1960. Boom, Frank. I mean, right there, right? We've got an answer to your great question, right?
Yes, thank you.
Of course, thank you. We cannot thank you enough. Good. Anybody else? Could we make any other connections or ideas that we could say when we see this poem and we get some more context? So now we've got things like justice, equality, rights, fighting for rights. Now come back to the poem. Now let's circle back to the meaning of the poem here. Again, when we read it the first time, we talked about the metaphors and the similes, right? So does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? Now let me ask you guys, in the context of this sort of justice, racism, American history context lens, let's talk about that word explode. What do we think about that now that we've learned a little bit more?
That Canada having a success.
Say some more. Say some more, Susan. I love it.
I have a background noise. It's hard to talk.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one, Susan.
Yeah, I was just thinking because the theme is basically about their movement, like the rights. So I was thinking because the rights passed, but still, it was unequal treatment. So I was wondering, maybe it's exploit. It's referring to like it succeed, like they have a success. They win.
I love it. Susanna, I love Susanna's point there, because Susanna, if I'm going to be careful here to talk about positive and negative, but Susanna's sort of using explode there, I would say in a kind of positive way, right? Like, ooh, the rights could explode, things could become equal, maybe something like fast movement, lots of change really quickly, right? But Aki in the chat wrote riots, right? Like an explosion, like people fighting, like violence, like riots, right? I mean, that's another way to interpret it.
I agree with both. It's just like you gotta be a riot to explode, and win. So it's like basically having both meanings in it.
Right, exactly right, exactly right. And again, if we think about the word, explode in the context of the rest of the metaphors, right? Does it fester like a sore? This is a very painful image, right? This is a very painful and difficult image. But then we do have this other image here, to your point, Susanna, we do have this, does it crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Now, maybe it's too sweet, maybe syrupy sweet, the consonants there, the alliteration that gives us a negative feeling. We could make that argument. It's too sweet, it's overly sweet. But we do get these, again, we talked about this a few weeks ago, we do get these contrasting metaphors. We do get these contrasting images. Now, I'll share for me, I'm with Aki. I think that last question at the end is a little bit dangerous. I think that last question is a little bit, this poem is from the actually, before let me just get the exact career right. I think it's 21. I'm going to guess and then be really wrong. Harlem is originally published 50. I was only 30 years late, you guys. Originally published in 1951. So 1951 for me gives me even more context. Think about how long things have been building, waiting, justice, rights, and waiting.
Wow.
Whoa, Frank, you agree? You like it?
Oh yeah. It's already 1963 is freedom speech, right? So it's already 12 years after this.
Excellent.
Civil rights, the law passed in 64, right?
65. The passage.
Oh,
of the
60.
Civil Rights. Yeah, I think Frank was talking about the March on Washington. That you were
Yes.
talking about his Dr. King's "I Have a Dream" speech, right, Frank?
Right. Yes, that's what I'm talking about.
The March in Washington is 1963. Slavery is officially ended at the end of the Civil War in the United States in 1865, right? So Langston Hughes's poem is almost 100 years after the end of slavery. So if we think about an explosion, if we think about something building, it's almost 100 years after the formal end of slavery, but it's still 12 years before the March on Washington, Frank, right? Like this poem where Langston Hughes is asking, hey, what happens to a dream deferred? And again, we talked about deferred means wait, doesn't come.
Like a delayed dream.
Exact delayed dream. Thank you, Linda, for remembering our exact synonym from last time.
Mhm,
Yes.
mhm.
So what happens? What happens when it keeps getting delayed, right? What happens when people wait?
They just like get tired of that, so it's gonna be.
Well, and again, I don't think I love this poem. It's a very important poem in U.S. history for this reason. He does something that many poets do. He doesn't give us an answer. He asks a series of questions, right? Is it like a raise? I think Linda was saying people get tired. To me,
Yeah.
that raisin in the sun is like shrinking, maybe giving up, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Does it fester like a sore and then run? This is almost like, I don't want to be too gross, but it's almost like an open cut, right? Fester like a sore is almost like a cut that never heals, right? That's kind of like that feeling. And then we know, does it stink like rotten meat? I mean, this is a very powerful image that the poet gives us, right? But again, for me, this last line of the poem, or does it explode? It's just it's a famous and important part of US history because, like Frank said, its connection to the civil rights and this feeling of like, what happens? What happens to something that's delayed for so long? Tahmina in the chat uses the word disappointed. Absolutely. I think some of the images in this poem do give us that feeling of disappointment. Absolutely. Oh my God, I love talking about this with you guys. Any other ideas or anything else that you think about, since we're just about, well, we got a few more minutes, but any other ideas or things to say about the poem here?
Is he expecting this gonna be happen?
What do you think, Frank?
That's his dream.
What is his dream?
His dream is equal opportunity with white light.
I think you're right. And I think that is his dream, but because the dream is not real yet, he's asking, what's going to happen here? Right? Like,
Right. That explode.
And like I said, we talked about this 2 weeks ago. In last year, we saw people in the streets, people marching in the streets about almost exactly a year ago, not much more than a year ago, because of the same feeling of waiting, delay. And I think, again, this image of an explosion is very powerful still to this day, because we all have that. We all know what that's like as a human being. We have something inside of us that's like building. And then it's like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Or, maybe just give up, walk away, whatever. But I think we all can identify with that feeling But then, of course, this poem, again, like we were talking about context, 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 the title of the poem, and I know, like I said, you guys, you know, this is why I'll introduce the Pearl. You guys need some background information to start to make these connections, right? But when I tell you, oh, Harlem is a famous Black neighborhood in the United States, ooh, okay, that's some important context for thinking about and analyzing this poem. And again, I want to be clear, and I'll finish here, but analyzing this poem, not just for the sounds and the syllables, which is beautiful. You could just do a poetic analysis of this poem and you could be absolutely correct, right? But there are deeper things going on, and this context absolutely helps you to see and understand those things. Okay, last call. We're wrapping up. Any other last ideas, last questions, last thoughts?
I forgot how many watts for the project. How many watts?
What a great transition question, Frank. That is a perfect transition to ending class today. Remember, the only thing that is due in Canvas is your poetry project paper. It is due 1 week from today. Also in Canvas, I'll set a reminder for you to read the first 40 pages of The Pearl by John Steinbeck. But Frank's question was, wait a minute, how many pages do I have to write? What am I going to be doing this week? Again, if we go back to the home page.
It depends the options that I think you choose.
Thank you, Linda. Linda, as always, is on it, is correct here. Remember, you can choose option A or option B. If you write your
No, I'm talking about the next project. I understand this one.
Oh, the literary analysis project. Good question, Frank.
Yes.
I don't want to tell you today. Why bother?
Okay. Okay.
I don't want you to feel too happy or too afraid of the literary analysis project today. Who cares? We'll talk about it in 2 weeks. We've got lots of time for the big research paper, Frank.
Okay, thank you.
I'll say this, start thinking 3 or 4 pages. You know, start thinking 3 or 4 pages, okay?
Okay.
And remember, you've got a whole book. So there's going to be lots for you to write about. Lots for you to write about. Anybody else? I'm checking in the chat. Dahmina, I just want to make sure we get her in here. There's a limit to be patient. When we don't see or what we wait for, then surely the last line will happen. Dahmina saying, yeah, I think explode is build, 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 explode. And Sanad says, thank you for everything. Sorry, I was busy with work. I couldn't participate in class. Sanad, you know you don't have to apologize. We appreciate and respect you being here. Any last call, last questions, last ideas? Oh, I see a comment in the chat. Oh, Sanad, you're so welcome. Making poems is difficult, Aki says. Writing poems is difficult. I am at a standstill. Hey, remember, you don't have to write your own poems. You only have an option. If you just want to analyze someone else's poems, you could do that. But yeah, I know what you're saying, Aki. You know, I try to write poems and sometimes I find it very difficult too. Both are difficult. Aki, come on. Well, I understand, but I'm asking you to do one of the two, okay, Aki?
I could go just like with option B. It's better for us.
Linda was very clear on that last week. Jeff, no way. I am not writing a poem. It's not going to happen. No way. That's why 2 choices. That's why 2 choices. I'm going to stop recording in case people have, but I'll be here, of course, for a few more minutes if people have questions. But if you're watching on the recording, goodbye.